Welcome everyone to episode 13 of Future Strong. I'm particularly excited this week because I have two authors who've been launching books in a virtual world. So I'm going to let Lindsay and Richard introduce themselves shortly. My name's Nikki Garchea and I'm the co-founder and chief customer officer at Capfinity. And Capfinity is very proud of its work supporting emerging talent in the strengths space. We work across recruitment and development using our strengths methodologies. And if you're just dialing into Future Strong for the first time, I need to tell you that 13 is not unlucky in every country. Certainly my Italian husband will say 13 is a very lucky number. So it's positive for some, which is good for Future Strong. So we'll take that for happy 13. And we are delighted to have Richard Orbé-Austin with us, joining us. But before we let Richard introduce himself, we would like Lindsay Pollak to introduce herself. Tell us a little bit about her week, because finally the birth of the book happened, Lindsay. Congratulations. And I think we have some accompanying photography of what you've been up to this week. So we'll let Hayley move to that. But Lindsay, introduce yourself and do share a little bit about how it's been on the virtual book tour.
Thank you so much, Nikki. I'm delighted that Future Strong has turned 13. We've entered puberty. This is very exciting for our show. My name is Lindsay Pollak. I am a career and workplace author and speaker. I'm also a very proud brand ambassador for Capfinity and Strengths and our virtual engagement and employment platform. I'm having flashbacks to one of the last live panels that I ever did before COVID. I was the moderator. Richard Orbé-Austin was one of our esteemed panelists. Last week's guest, James Boyle, was one of the panelists. Nikki was in the audience. She was speaking after or before our presentation. So the friendships forged before COVID are going strong. As Nikki mentioned, on Tuesday of this week, March 23rd, my new book launched, Recalculating, Navigate Your Career Through the Changing World of Work. Thank you. I've never launched a book during a pandemic, so I thought I would share. Nikki invited me and had the great idea to share some photos from the week. So Hayley, if you want to show, I couldn't have a book party, so I had a book party with my husband and daughter. So you can see that was our very exciting conversation in her Recalculating t-shirt on our back deck. Fred Burke, one of our favorite audience members and guests on Future Strong, and his dog Quinn. He's representing Recalculating with his "We Are All Recalculating" sticker. Even the dogs are recalculating because of COVID. I did several bookstore and webinar events, so I think we have some photos from them as well. All of these are online and available. One of the cool things I think about pandemic book promotion, and Richard, I'd love your thoughts, is a lot of this stuff is available after. So if you missed it, it has a long tail and you can check it out. So thank you to Nikki and everyone at Capfinity for your support. Capfinity are featured in the book. They offer a free strengths profile for anybody who reads the book. We can put up the link, HayleyLindsayPollak.com/SP for anyone who wants to experience strengths profile. And please check out Recalculating. If you want a signed bookplate, I have them here. I can mail you my signature to stick into your book, which is almost as good as the real thing. And I really appreciate your support. So thank you.
It's brilliant. Actually, and Chloe had refashioned it into a dress. You know, you've got a whole new swag. It's not just t-shirts anymore. It
is a 9-year-old mini dress. Somebody thought it was a cape. There were a lot of interpretations of how she wore the t-shirt, but I'd be delighted to present some swag to anybody who's interested. It's really all about the swag during COVID. So I will send the party to you.
We're just so obsessed with real things.
With real things, yes. I will mail you something in the mail that you can actually hold in your hands.
So Richard, we can see your book just behind you, but please, if you would, we're so pleased to have you with us, psychologist and executive leadership expert and coach, Richard. Tell us a little bit about your book before we ask you to share some secrets about your career.
Sure. So I will say, to speak first to 13, I've come to love 13 because my wife's birthday is June 13th and I live on the 13th floor. So it all makes sense for us to celebrate 13.
It was meant to be.
Exactly. Who knew? So again, I'm thrilled to be joining Nikki and Lindsay. It is like a reunion from the last time we were all together. Again, as mentioned, I'm Dr. Richard Orbé-Austin. I am a psychologist and executive coach, and also the co-author of a book called Own Your Greatness, Overcome Imposter Syndrome, Beat Self-Doubt, and Succeed in Life. The book will turn 1 in about a few weeks. So I did launch in a digital space, even though that was not necessarily the plan. I will say to you that swag is very important. And my 2 daughters, my 9 and 11-year-old, are always creating new swag, Lindsay. So
you
I
have a
think
9-year-old too. They can all play Roblox together, hang out and promote our books together with Nikki's kids. I love it. I love it.
So let her come up with all the creative, swag ideas, because they came up with some wonderful ones during the pandemic. So we were able to really leverage it during that time period. So the book is really focused on this notion of imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome, for those of you who may not be familiar with the term, is a concept that's been studied since 1978. It was coined by 2 psychologists that really looked at the experience primarily initially of women in an academic setting. And they noticed that women were not, these are highly achieved women, but they were not able to feel like they could internalize their skill sets, internalize their strengths. They kept talking about feeling fraudulent, being concerned about being exposed as a fraud. And so they coined the term imposter phenomenon, imposter syndrome, to really speak to this actual experience of when you might feel like you're constantly being exposed or anxious about being exposed as a fraud. You find it difficult to internalize your talents and your skill sets. You overwork as a result of that because you feel like that's the only way that you can be successful. You discount any type of positive, affirmations as just your success being attributed solely to luck or to key relationships. So this book really focuses on a clear path and a model to overcome imposter syndrome. So when I say co-authors, my wife and I wrote the book together. And what we realized is that although it's been studied for over 40 years, there were no clear practical models to talk about how to conquer imposter syndrome. And since it's not a mental health diagnosis per se, it's not something that you can be cured of. It's something that you want to make sure no longer has the impact that it has in your life. And so we designed a model. It's a 3-step model called Clarify, Choose, Create, that really looks at the ways for you to conquer imposter syndrome based on both research and our own experiences working with clients.
Richard, before we get to those 3, which I really want to talk through, can you just give us a little bit of your background? How does somebody become an expert on imposter syndrome? What drew you to that topic? And I know that you have your PhD, so you have a lot of education in your background. Can you just tell us how you got to this moment and this expertise?
Sure. So, when someone might have asked me, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? I would probably say, for a long time, I knew I wanted to be a psychologist. I thought that I'd have a private practice doing mental health focused work around anxiety and depression. I actually went to my doctoral program with the idea that at the conclusion, I would have a practice and then live happily ever after. But something funny happened along the way. I fell in love with career development, and I always had a love for diversity, equity, inclusion. So specifically related to cultural competence. And so during the course of my training, I had an opportunity to work in career services centers and mental health centers and counseling centers. And during that period of time, I really focused my research on the intersection and the interplay of career development as well as cultural competence. So when I concluded my studies, I thought again that I would eventually still start my practice. But in the interim, I started to work in higher ed. So I worked in higher ed for over 15 years, primarily in career services capacities, also as a chief diversity officer. And what I realized is that there were so many incredibly talented students, so many incredibly talented people that I had the opportunity to engage with, but that they felt stuck for one reason or another. So whether it was a first-year student who said, I don't know if I belong in this university, whether it was an early career professional saying, I don't know if I can make it down this path, And so I started to try to think about, well, what are some of the themes that really prevent individuals from being as successful and as happy as they wish to be? And imposter syndrome was one of those things. And so we talk a great deal about some of the realities of the workplace and some of the challenges, but this particular element seemed to be something that was not discussed in the vein of career advancement, career satisfaction. And so we had an opportunity, my wife and I, to really speak to that. And so we started our practice. We, again, saw so many individuals, so many professionals struggling with imposter syndrome, and we wanted to find a way to support them and help them to feel that they could overcome it, to really live the full life that they wanted to live. And that's how we came about, having this opportunity to write the book.
I'm gonna dive in because I know Lindsay's also desperate to know. You mentioned those 3 parts of the model. It would be brilliant to hear a bit about those. And just drawing off your career services experience, what does this mean for job seekers at the moment, individuals who are contemplating applying for jobs, particularly kind of as they graduate, and maybe people this year who haven't got into the roles that they were hoping to, haven't got on the internships? Love your advice when you think about your 3-point model.
Sure. So one of the things that I talk about with imposter syndrome is that there's a hidden cost to it, because if people don't have a frame or a language to speak about what they're experiencing, they may just say, oh, I don't have any confidence, so I'm not going to pursue particular paths. So that may mean a student deciding not to pursue a competitive internship. That might mean an early career professional not trying to find a promotion opportunity because they feel that they either don't belong, they're not good enough, they'll be exposed if they try to do something in a more advanced way. So when we talk about the model, the 3 C's model, the first part of the model is clarify. And what we talk about here is this notion of clarifying your origin story related to imposter syndrome. So there's a lot, unfortunately, in the literature lately, or not even literature really, just in the popular culture about what imposter syndrome is and what it isn't and what causes it. And the reality is it typically comes from family of origin, roles. So when we look at some of the roles that you have, either you were identified as a smart one in your family and felt that everything came naturally to you. And that when you met adversity, if you didn't do well in a class or you didn't do well in an internship, you then feel like that's an indicator that you were a fraud the whole time. And then the imposter syndrome, continues in that way, right? Lindsay's pointing that way. Or on the other hand, you may not have been, identified as a smart one. You were identified as more socially adept or a hard worker. Even if you did the same and you did better even academically than that sibling or that family member that was identified as the smart one, you still received the message that the only way you could be successful is if you worked really, really, really hard to the point of overwork, because ultimately you were not smart enough. And then the final role that we talk about in the origin story is that of someone who, for whatever reason or another, were neglected, was not given feedback about their skills or their talent. So for them, it was only about survival. So they never had a chance to even think about their skill sets, their strengths. They were just trying to survive. And so when they get into these particular spaces, they don't know how to quantify their skill sets, and the imposter syndrome, then becomes part of their identity. So being able to understand the origin story, first and foremost, allows you to recognize these were some signals and cues that I took on that were not accurate. And once you do that, then you begin to know and understand the next part of that step and that phase is understanding your triggers and trapdoors. So some of your triggers might be a new job, a new assignment if you're a student, a new internship if you're a student, a new opportunity, meeting new people. So these are triggers because it feels like you need to prove yourself. You are then going to be exposed because you're not going to be able to do this particular project this time, or you're not going to pass this exam. So understanding those triggers and how to respond to them differently allows you the chance to counter it. And then finally, in that phase, it's changing your narrative, because people with imposter syndrome have, again, this false narrative that the only reason they're successful is because they were lucky or someone liked them, rather than that they not only worked hard, but they had capacity relative to skills, relative to strengths to be successful. They did not have to be perfect, but they have the ability to shine. And so when we think about just in the clarify stage, being able to apply it to campus career services, recruitment, helping students to know and understand their accurate narrative, helping them understand their triggers, and realizing that they should still pursue opportunities that they may perceive as risk because it will trigger them.
Thank you for bringing it back to career services. I think so many students feel this for the first time or feel it acutely, right? When they're on campus, when they're going through the recruiting process. I want to sort of talk about the overlaps with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've always associated imposter syndrome with women, or I think it's been associated with women. Can you talk about the overlaps with women, underrepresented groups, people of color? You know, how does it sort of mix and match in that regard?
Yeah, this is a great question. And this speaks to some of the myths about imposter syndrome that are floating about on the internet, because even though it was initially conceptualized with women, men and women experience it at the same level of frequency, but it shows up differently for them. So women tend to work hard and work toward a goal, even though they tend to work and deal with fraudulence at higher levels. Men, on the other hand, tend to affiliate with lower, less successful peers, and may not take as much risk to preserve their ego relative to imposter syndrome. So a good deal of the time when we work with clients who can articulate imposter syndrome, quite honestly, it is women, because of the fact that they, through overwork, through this anxiety, seek some support. Not that men don't, right? And so there are no absolutes, but what we see in the research is that that's how it shows up. Men may not take as much risk because they don't want to be exposed in that way. So when we talk about imposter syndrome and the double impact that women and BIPOC first generation students experience, it's this reality of internally feeling like an imposter and feeling like you're not good enough. And then externally, the environment sending you signals, either as a woman, as a BIPOC individual, as first gen student, that you also don't belong or that you're not good enough and that you're an imposter. So being able to work with students to know and understand first that this is what they're experiencing, that it's a normal thing. 70% of the population experience imposter syndrome at one stage of their life, will experience it. So helping them to know and understand, even though they have those feelings, does not mean that they don't belong. It's helping them, again, to shift into changing their narrative, which goes into the second part of the model, which is choose. And here we talk about being able to very much clarify and speak your truth. And so when we talk about speaking your truth, it's saying, I have imposter syndrome. It's something I'm struggling with. I'm not going to be ashamed of it. Oftentimes, a good deal of people who have imposter syndrome are highly successful. And so they feel ashamed to say that they're struggling with this, that people will ridicule them or say, well, what do you have to be, sad or embarrassed about? You're so successful. Why are you complaining? So speaking your truth means both saying that you're having this experience, and then two, being able to own your actual strengths, identifying your competencies, letting you know that these accomplishments are real. And so that's one piece of it. The next piece of it that we want to counter are these automatic negative thoughts that people with imposter syndrome tend to have. So these ants, as we call them, because they're always just floating about in your brain. So it can be mind reading. Oh, my professor doesn't think that I'm capable. My internship supervisor doesn't think I'm as talented as other people. Fortune telling. I know if I try to get this internship, it's not going to go well, and I'm going to embarrass myself. So there are a whole list of ants that we want you to first identify and then counter by having an actual questioning the ant and then having a positive statement. So when you think about mind reading, well, what is the data that your intern supervisor doesn't think you're as talented as everyone else? Could there be another reason that you're having this particular thought? What is the way that you can counter it in terms of a positive statement? I'm going to think about the fact that I'm doing a good job. My supervisor will most likely give me some feedback, but it doesn't mean that he doesn't think that I'm talented. And then finally, in this stage, it's being able to focus on your self-care. Because as we talked about, students, people, individuals with imposter syndrome will tend to overwork because they feel like that's the only way they can be successful. So valuing self-care, taking time for it, particularly during this pandemic, we've seen a great deal of burnout. We've seen a good deal of withdrawal because of overwhelm. So we want to make sure that that's centered in the work related to imposter syndrome.
We're both dying. You can see us come off mute in unison. Very rarely happens. We're normally very contained. But I'm going to quickly put another question in. Richard, I'm listening to you, and I think everyone listening in right now will be relating to what you're saying at a personal level, thinking of students that they're supporting. And I'm thinking of Capfinity clients, many of which are global heads of talent. They spend a great deal of their days trying to, I think, recruit students, or I know recruit students who absolutely experience imposter syndrome. They would like to recruit more early talented women. They would like to recruit more Black people, more Asian people, differently abled candidates, first gen talent you've mentioned. And I wonder whether you have spoken to talent acquisition folk around the recruitment process and how to navigate the process, bearing in mind the imposter syndrome that clearly individuals are going to be experiencing. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. I think a great deal of what's changing in the workplace is the reality of virtual recruiting, virtual workplaces, and interviewing, and what that may mean for talent. And so one of the things that I talk about with recruiters is how to make sure you're connecting in ways that will allow that person to show his or her full self. And what I mean by that is, rather than thinking, some students may be challenged. I think we take it for granted. We've got great broadband. We're able to connect in these particular ways. And if a student feels like, all right, I don't want to, have this interview even apply because I'm going to have to interview in, a cramped space, or, I'll go in and out relative to the actual internet connection, providing different modalities to engage with students. And so, it's an odd thing because we've got so much technology nowadays, but, even something as simple as going back to some of the phone interviews, right, is something that's useful, because you don't want to take it for granted that there are also, cues relative to bias that are triggered when you're, looking at someone through the virtual space, right? You read what their lives may be like, and how, what judgments you may make about them based on their backgrounds, or based on what's happening in the foreground as well, right? So being able to recognize that there are some particular biases that may exist based on in the virtual workspace, and creating modalities and opportunities for students to engage with you in ways that are not necessarily going to make them opt out because they feel like they won't have the same access or make the same impressions that they might wish to make, I think is one of the critical things that I talk about, as well as, and I know recruiters are doing this all the time, just having more informal spaces, that it shouldn't solely be about, on-campus virtual recruiting by the time you see a student, making sure that they do more of these informal events and even one-on-one opportunities for students to engage with them in ways that allow them to, again, connect and feel comfortable with the process.
I also think transparency of leaders and recruiters of admitting their own experiences with imposter syndrome can be so powerful, right? To say, I felt that too, I've been there. Yeah, I think that's so important. Can you finish your 3 C's? And I'd also love to hear other advice you have for recruiters and career services professionals, I think, and parents, right? To sort of help shepherd people through this, because, it strikes me as someone who's had anxiety and imposter syndrome and all the things. It's also what we're most worried about is some huge external situation that makes it even harder. And that's exactly what we're going through. So it's been, everything's exacerbated because of COVID. So can you finish your advice? And what can we do to help, as we sort of get back to somewhat normal-ish, how do we account for this? This is tough.
Yeah, it is. And it segues into the last C, which is create, which the first piece of it is thinking about taking up new roles. So when you have imposter syndrome, there are particular roles that you are more likely to take up. So the super person, the person who feels like they're the knowledge hub, that they want people to ask them for advice or, give advice, but they don't necessarily want to seek it. So being able to feel like you can be both a knowledge hub and a knowledge seeker, being able to be a super person and someone who can, seek support will be critical. So being able to recognize that the role should not be fixed, that the concern or the fear for someone with imposter syndrome is, oh, if I ask for help, they're going to know then I can't do something. And now it'll be exposed as a fraud and then it all falls apart. So giving them the comfort to feel like, yes, I can have multiple roles and it'll be fine, will be critical. And the next piece of the puzzle is forming what we call your dream team of support. And so that's not only mentorship, but someone who's your grounder. Like if you start freaking out about something, they're your reality check. There's someone who's an action planner who says, okay, well, what are you up to now? What are you planning to do relative to your internship search or your job search? So it's having someone who's an imposter syndrome expert on the team. So knowing and saying, oh, your imposter syndrome might be flaring up or what's happening. These seem to be ants that are going on. So having that dream team of support in place. And again, for students, it can be built-in mentors, it can be advisors, it can be professors, it can be friends and family members, but articulating the need and making sure that you have someone to take on various roles rather than having just one person try to handle all of it would be a bit much. And then the final piece of the final step is understanding your optimal conditions for success. And that means making sure to develop a plan that speaks to shifting the narrative, being able to understand the dream team. It's really just a full summary of all the various phases and stages that allows you to say, oh, I know one of the things I need to work on are the ants, or I need to work on changing my narrative because it tends to be distorted and causes me to have difficulty when I talk about myself. And so when we talk about advice for career services professionals, one of the things that, I recently just did a talk about the hidden costs of imposter syndrome for students is to be able to find ways to introduce this concept to students. So that might be through the lens of having a workshop where it's discussed in job search. So for instance, one of the things that we recognize with imposter syndrome are that individuals are less likely to pursue particular roles because of the imposter syndrome. That there are poor career outcomes for people with imposter syndrome because they are less likely to want to negotiate. They're just happy to have the opportunity rather than to say, okay, I deserve X. So being able to, first and foremost, allow them to talk about it, building spaces for students to share their experiences. I think to your point, Lindsay, having individuals that they trust talk about their own experiences with imposter syndrome and how even though they may experience it, they still move forward in their search. Because of the fact that it, for many people, feels like a shame, they suffer in silence with imposter syndrome. And once you suffer in silence, then you're less likely, especially for students, what we see, students with imposter syndrome have higher dropout intentions, lower engagement. And so when we talk about engagement, that may mean everything from student clubs, but that also means connection to career services, right? And so we want to be able to find these students who might be going through these experiences that never show up to the actual career center. So it's being able to cross collaborate, right? So being able to work with the counseling center or academic advisement to talk about some of these issues, orientation, first year experience, so that it's introduced early in their process and they see that it's something that is, again, normal, but something that they can defeat and conquer, and it won't impact their ability to pursue their passions. Some students may decide to opt out of a particular major because they feel it's too competitive. I always remember when I worked in career services and, we would talk about a particular recruiter coming in and we'd be going through OCR and some students would say, well, how many other students applied? And it was always an odd question to me because I thought, I never would think about that, right? I would never think, okay, well, how competitive is it? But for them, I'm imagining they felt like, well, if there were too many competitors, then I'm not even going to try. And so a lot of the work at that time was to say, the competitor is yourself. So how do we get you to focus on what you want and your needs without thinking about any external factors?
I wish you had been my career counselor. That's all I'm saying. In the chat, Trudy Steinfeld, our colleague, said you were doing this impactful work before most people understood the importance of belonging. And I would add imposter syndrome. I think just having leaders who are aware of this and can identify it. Jeannie Like-Harris said amazing insights and understanding in how imposter syndrome shows up. There's just so much compassion that I think is so necessary. And I really worry about these kids coming up now with all the challenges. So thank you so much for sharing these wonderful thoughts. Dream team of support. I wrote that down. Nikki, Richard, you're on my dream team of support. Trudy and Jeannie too. But that's such a beautiful, I just love that. I love that. I wrote it down and I'm going to use it. So thank you so much for your insight.
We're here for you, Lindsay.
Beautiful. I'm here for you too. Am I a fraud? Did I handle this interview okay? Okay.
No, I think you did pretty well for yourself, Lindsay. So
Richard, thank you so much. We could have had another hour with you, and I think maybe we'll get you back, and I'd love to hear more about how this shows up within executive talent as well.
Yes.
Really incredible 3 insights, practical suggestions that I know that the listeners will be able to apply straight away from a career services perspective and also in talent acquisition. I hope we can get this out, team, to a younger audience as well, because it can have an instant impact. So we'll think about, I know this stream's now live on YouTube, so we can also make sure that it reaches a broader audience. It would be, here we go. Haley, perfect. I was just going to say, if people want to know more about Richard's book, here it is in its greatness. It's appearing out of the side of Richard's head for the whole time today. This rainbow explosion.
I've learned to promote.
Yeah, rainbow explosion, absolutely. And we've got Richard's website there, so please do connect, buy this great book, and hopefully we can all support this new generation of talent to overcome some of the experiences and to use the 3 C's to overcome it. Richard, thank you for your time. That's all we have time for at Future Strong today. On the 9th of April, or April 9, should I say, for my US colleagues, we will have Maura Quinn from Liberty Mutual, who heads up campus hiring. And she will be sharing how Liberty Mutual are supporting emerging talent at these times. So a small break for Lindsay and I of 2 weeks, and then back again for episode 14. Richard, thank you so much for your time. Lindsay, we wish you all the success with Recalculating. 2 amazing books that everyone should go purchase. If you recalculate and you also understand imposter syndrome in one, I think we will be all stronger. Thank you both, and
thank you.
We look forward to speaking next time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.